Hello there, hunters. My name is Ravon Lake, and welcome back. You may call me Rev. So, Rurikhan came out with a new video yesterday talking about this new system in Monster Hunter Sunbreak. This system being the Qurious Armor crafting. And he gave you his opinion on what he thinks about the system and why he dislikes the system. I even think he said that he hates it, which is kind of drastic, but yeah, he hates the system and it's understandable why. He even gave you the reasons why, or gave us. Even I understand the reasons why he hates the system. One of them being that it's completely RNG based, which is understandable. RNG has its own flaws, and systems like that can be kind of tedious. And one of the things that he mentions is that certain weapons suffer from the Qurious Armor crafting a lot more than other weapons. So because you're able to get all the necessary skills on certain weapons easier, you're required to get them through the Qurious Armor system on other weapons. So Gunlance probably being one of them that suffer a lot from having to get the skills from the Qurious Armor system instead of, running full Basal Geese armor or something. So it's understandable where the frustration comes from. Now, at the end of the video, Rurikhan talks about a very important thing, which I think a lot of people kind of miss when they complain about systems. So I've heard so many people complain about systems in Monster Hunter based on RNG or whatever without actually coming up with any solutions themselves. They just like to complain for the sake of complaining without actually trying to figure out how to actually fix this thing. It's understandable that RNG in general is considered bad because of the nature that you might be one of the people who doesn't get anything out of it. No matter how hard you try, you might be someone who doesn't just get the things that you would want. So Rurikhan on the video actually comes up with something, at least, something akin to a solution to this system, where it doesn't completely remove the RNG idea of the Qurious Armor system, but lays a deterministic system on top of it. And what I mean by deterministic system is that you have a way to influence what skills you would get from it. And on paper, it sounds completely fine. And I know that this is just a suggestion, an example, and it's not something that he would actually probably want to implement into the game. But that's one of the problems of game development. It is incredibly hard to create a system that is, both rewarding and it doesn't take anything away from the gameplay, and also something that doesn't cause too much, annoyance from the community or whatever have you. So on the example he gives is that in the Qurious Armor crafting system you would have a way to hunt Rathalos in an investigation and get the materials out of that investigation, put those materials into the armor crafting, and you would get skills from that monster. Specifically, you would get from Rathalos, you would get like Mind's Eye or Wind Resistance, for example. You would get those skills more prominently. So let's say it increases the drop rate of Wind Resistance by 0.5% depending on how many items you put in there, and eventually it would increase that value so high that you would just get the Wind Resistance. So on paper that sounds good, but what it does to the whole gameplay is that a lot of people would just skip 90% of the monsters that they would hunt. So simply because it would limit certain skills or the boosts to skills that you would get to certain monsters. Like if you want to weakness exploit hunt, let's say Rathalos for example, hunt Rathalos and you get weakness exploit, everyone would just focus on those monsters instead. And that's where the RNG aspect is beneficial, where because it's completely RNG, the investigations that you do is irrelevant. You can do whatever monster you want, and that's really good thing. We don't want another example of what happened in Monster Hunter World, where we had investigations, but we only did, the tier level 3 monsters, and everything under that was just a waste of time. We don't want that either. So that's what it would introduce into the Qurios Armor set if we start to make some deterministic approach to it. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a solution to this. I would add a solution to this, for example, that instead of it being monster-specific items, it would just be that, hey, if you put enough essences into this Qurios Armor crafting system, it would just increase the drop rate of high-value skills. Eventually, maybe it increases it by 0.01%, something that's relatively small, but still something that that is affecting the drop rate of that skill. So the more that you do the Qurious crafting and the more you rotate the skill, the higher chance you have for certain skills to pop up. That alone, I think, would satisfy many players. Now, of course, that's just an example, and that's not the whole point of the video. I think a lot of the issue of the video is also about RNG in general in Monster Hunter and these systems that they have in place. And I want to give you kind of an overlook on these things simply because I have a certain viewpoint on this. So I'll give you examples of what RNG is and what deterministic systems are, and we'll go from there. So RNG suffers from the fact that, hey, you might be one of the people that doesn't get any of the things that you would want ever. And there's a chance of that happening. Every single time you roll the dice, you get something bad. And then there's the negative part of someone else rolling the thing that you wanted first go. So first time they roll the dice, they get the thing that you wanted. So there's that negative aspect as well. But the positive aspects is that it allows random items and it allows almost endless endgame loops. What I mean by this is that random items means that you have talismans with different attributes to them, but are still the same talisman. So something like a talisman with +1 attack and a talisman with +2 attack. They're the same talisman, but one is better than the other. So you have randomized items in there. But then you also have the ability to get something really good and still have something better in that pool of items. So that's RNG systems, its benefits and its negative parts. Then we have deterministic systems. Now, there's kind of soft deterministic systems and hard deterministic systems. I'm just going to focus for now on the hard deterministic systems. The idea comes from Final Fantasy XIV, which actively tries to fight against RNG generally and is very deterministic in its approach. Be active with the game, log in every week, do the savage content, and if you do the savage content, you will be rewarded with this specific item. And you will get the thing that you want at the end of it if you're just active with the game. Do savage content, do ultimate content, whatever it is, it's very deterministic. The problem with deterministic systems is that there is a finite end them. So eventually you will find the end of that. And a lot of the times what ends up happening is that either you reach the end really fast and you're wondering, what do I do now? And that's a lot what happens in Final Fantasy XIV, where people just wait for the next content update just to increase their +1, you know. And other times what developers do is that they artificially extend the life of that deterministic system by increasing values. So instead of you needing to gather 5 of these items in 5 weeks, instead of that they increase the value to 10 items. So now you have to wait for 10 weeks in order to get these items. And these systems work really well on, you know, MMO games in generally, because MMO games, generally speaking, force people to play a certain way where they need to be active with the game. It's a live service, you know. But on the other side of that, you also have deterministic system that, you know, have certain value of items, like collect 500 herbs or whatever and collect 500 flowers in order to craft this thing that you wanted. So you have that as well, and then they can increase values for those in order to make that deterministic system not more engaging, but something that requires player activity to a certain extent for it to not end immediately. And that's also where the kind of reward system comes into play. So you feel incredibly happy that you got something simply because you worked towards it so hard. And deterministic systems help you with that, where you know that you're working towards something specific and you get the thing at the end. And the problem on that side is that you cannot put anything RNG based as a reward if you're playing on a deterministic system. If you had something like a sword or multiple swords with different values in a chest, and you played every week in order to open that chest, and you got something bad out of that chest, well, you would feel incredibly dissatisfied and you would feel demotivated to play the game anymore. This is the problem that we have with World of Warcraft, where content is actually difficult to do. You have so much trouble doing this raid or whatever it is, and on top of that you're playing around with rolling the dice and figuring out who gets the actual item or the mount or whatever it is. So that's where the problem lies, is difficult content, and then on top you have RNG as well. And that's why I don't think specifically deterministic system work that well with Monster Hunter, simply because you would end up in the same situation where you're playing this deterministic system, but you're rewarded with RNG items. Now, obviously you can target specific items with deterministic system, but Monster Hunter has so many RNG items that it wouldn't really work on that aspect. Now let's kind of look into Monster Hunter specifically a little bit more. So if we go back in time with Monster Hunter, I do think that the base core game benefited a lot from the RNG system, simply because items were actually rare to get. So when we think about something that Rurikhan likes to say a lot, is that he enjoys Monster Hunter simply because there's the aspect of, hey, I want a fire sword, go hunt the fire monster, you get the fire sword. And to a degree that's correct, but it's only fun in the older games, I would say. What I mean by this is that in older games, items were relatively rare. Getting something like a plate or a ruby or a mantle was something of a miracle, I would say, to many people, and getting that final upgrade on a weapon was just a massive relief, and you were so happy to get that final upgrade on certain weapons, simply because the items were so rare to get. And that gave you that kind of boost to play the game more. It gave you the idea that, hey, I'm kind of a main character in this game. I'm the superhero of this game, or, you know, it feels like you're in a shonen anime and you're the main character of that. And simply because you have something unique. And you can boast about those things because they're tangible items, they're weapons, they're armors, whatever it is. If you have something that's like a armor piece, Rathalos armor piece, someone else with a Jaggy armor piece might be looking at that and be like, hey, I want that too. How do I get it? Well, play the game more. Now, as games have evolved nowadays with Most Hunter World and with Most Hunter Rise, the developers have devalued the importance of RNG in the main quests. So a lot of the items that you get are more deterministic in that you can pretty much say that, hey, I'm going to get a mantle in a couple of hunts. You can pretty much say that with utmost certainty. Outside of some specific items like Almudron Orb, those are still pretty rare. But I would argue that if I go and hunt Rathalos in Sunbreak now, I would probably get a mantle within 5 hunts. Most likely. So they've devalued the importance of RNG in the main system of the game. So what ends up happening is that they need to introduce new systems, new ideas on how to extend the life of the game, how to, satisfy the players who are at the end of the game and are figuring out what do I do now. Because back in the day, before World and before Most Hunter Rise, people didn't reach that point in the end game before the developers had to put in or find new solutions. No, the game was released in the state that it was, and I would say that if I go back to Most Hunter Tri today, I still have things to do in that game. Even though that game has like 18 monsters in it, I would still find ways or find things to do in that game. Simply because there's so many rarity drops in that game and things that I didn't get. And similarly with 4 Ultimate, there's so much in that game that I didn't get. I could go back to 4 Ultimate and have fun with the game, enjoy my time with it. The problem is with Most Hunter Rise is that these RNG items, if you look at just base Rise, there was a reason why people stopped playing the game, simply because at the end of it you only had talismans to grind for. And that's one of the problems in general with Most Hunter Rise. I think that they should fix this specifically. Talismans always in my mind were something that you would work on the background, on the side. You were focusing on something else and you would get talismans as a quest reward. You could get them from ore mining, and you could also melt them if you wanted to, but it wasn't like the be-all end-all of things to do. It was just a bonus thing to do. So currently with Sunbreak, it's the main thing to do. Instead of you just getting talismans occasionally on the side, you're just focusing on how do I cheese this system that is in front of me. So what ends up happening is that players try to figure out how to effectively cheese systems. So how do I effectively melt the talismans? How do I effectively make Qurious armor crafting as easy as possible for me. So I would just hunt Great Baggy or something until the end of time. Just rotate that multiple times. I don't need to hunt freaking Kushaladara. There's no reason for me to do that. So those are the aspects of what's problematic of these systems. And it's understandable why people are frustrated with it. Now, my viewpoint is also that Monster Hunter does need RNG systems. Now, if you look at the Qurious Armor system and the Talisman systems, the problem with these are that because they're RNG based, they have more problems with them than there needs to be. That is simply because these are stat-based systems. So they're nothing tangible for the player. They're basically just attribute points or skill points, whatever you have. You just have skills that you can unlock with these things. And when you look at a role-playing game, you usually have systems to respec your attributes. You know, remove points from health and put them into stamina. And I think that's one of the problems with the Qurious Armor system and the Talisman system, is that you don't have a direct way to influence what skills you're going to get. And that's what people want, a way to influence what skills they get and what skills they don't get. Now, that's one side of it. But the reason why I enjoy having RNG in Monster Hunter is simply because I think it should be something tangible, and I think it should be rewarding for the player to do RNG based systems. The Qurious armor crafting system isn't particularly it, neither is the Talisman system. For me, tangible items are weapons and armor sets, for example. I think, for example, I keep saying for example multiple times, sorry. If you look at 4 Ultimate had a incredible way of influencing the player to play the game more, simply because of the relic system. I know that it wasn't the perfect system in existence, but it was way better than the Kul Tarot relic system. What the relic system allowed was you to feel actually unique in the game. It made you feel like the main character. When you had the best relic, greatsword or whatever, you felt like you reached something that no one else is going to reach. And even if they reached that same point, they would have something different. Even if it was a greatsword, it was a different greatsword than yours in most cases, simply because there were color variations to those relics and different unique styles as well. So that's what the relic system allowed for people. Even though the RNG was horrible for most people, what it did was something incredible, where if you joined a lobby, you felt like, hey, what is that? I want that. How do I get it? I want to get it. And that's actually what happened to me, because I saw someone with dual blades that I had never seen before. Incredible attack power, incredible sharpness with 3 slots. I think it was poison dual blades. And it was just incredible to see that. And it immediately made me feel like, hey, I want those as well, or I want something similar. That kind of aspect has gone away from Monster Hunter a little bit. Like, I can say that even in Monster Hunter 1 I had that same feeling when I first joined in the online lobby and I saw someone in Fatalis armor set and with the Dragon Seal greatsword. It was an incredible sight. I don't think it was called Dragon Seal at the time. Something else, Eternal Annihilator or something. So I felt like, hey, I want these things, and immediately as I saw that, hey, you need to actually work on these things. You need to be active with the game, you need to be playing, you need to suffer RNG to your bone. But I suffered through it, and it was incredibly satisfying for me to get those things. Now, going forwards with time with Sunbreak, that's not the case anymore. Everyone is running with the same armor sets, same skills, same this and that. It doesn't really matter what skills you have on your armor set. No one cares. Just play the game. And yeah, that's about it. There's no uniqueness in anything really anymore. And it's incredibly demotivating for me to play something that's RNG based and not be rewarded with anything actually unique for me. I think that's what most people want from an RNG system. Now, is there room for deterministic systems for Most Honor? For sure, yes. I think Alatrion in Most Honor World is an example of this, where it was difficult enough of a monster to hunt, where deterministic system would actually be relatively beneficial for the hunt. It wouldn't matter if the items you get from it are RNG based or deterministic if the hunt is actually difficult to do. Right? I don't see anyone arguing about that. So there is room for deterministic systems in certain situations, and I think that the idea that Rurikhan gave for the Qurios Armor crafting is a solid one, but it also has issues. Game development is incredibly difficult, and you're going to run into situations that you didn't expect. Regardless if you're doing an RNG based system or if you're doing a deterministic system. A lot of the times you're going to run into systems like, hey, this doesn't really work on this instance. And that's the problem. How do you figure that out? I honestly don't know. But I do think that in the future it's probably best to have an RNG system as a groundwork, and on top we have a deterministic system to influence that RNG a little bit. A way to influence RNG in a good direction, where you're not indefinitely just fighting against RNG every turn you take. So yeah, that's about it for this video. I'm sorry it took so long, 30-minute video, goddammit. Anyhow, thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you guys on the next. Bye bye!